Okay, evening folks, hello, afternoon. Welcome to your evening talk with Michael Wilde. It promises to be an amazing event. So Michael Wilde is going to be talking to you with a session called A Career in VFX, University and Beyond. So it's a look at his 10-year journey from studying at uni, from then his first job, and working on some of the biggest films in the world. So it's going to be a really amazing talk. Just a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, if you're taking photos for Instagram or Twitter, I do recommend. Make sure you do use the hashtag IW22. It means you're in the running with our competition. So that means go follow Confetti on Instagram and Twitter. Go follow our VFX account, because we are kind of posting stories up as we go. So make sure you're on your socials. Again, with the kind of fire safety we have to cover, we are in metronome. So if there is a bit of a fire event, I guess, yeah, bit of a panic, we are going to find the nearest emergency exit, just follow the massive screaming people, and we will then kind of wait on Brook Street, which is just behind metronome. So that's our fire safety evacuation area. With that all said, enjoy the talk. I'm now going to bring you Michael Wilde. Thank you.
Hello, how's it going? I am he, that guy. I'm a visual effects artist. Yeah, who am I? I'm a visual effects artist. I've been doing it for, I realized this year, God, 8 and a bit years nearly 8 or 9 years, I don't know. It all kind of blurs into one, especially after the last couple of years. Yeah, and I've worked at a few companies, but we'll get onto that. Why did I get into 3D? So my mum was really artsy and my dad was really like mathematical. He was like a pilot. My mum paints all the time. So I kind of got brought up in a household where I sort of learned Photoshop really early and like random things like that. And then I saw one of the most groundbreaking things I think I've ever seen in my life. And it kind of just changed the way that I sort of decided to go with life. And that was a movie called Shrek the Halls, which wasn't even a mainline Shrek. It was I'm assuming straight-to-TV version of Shrek at Christmas. I remember, it's the most stupid thing, but I was at my nan's and they had this on TV one Christmas, and the way that Shrek moved through the snow like blew my mind, because he like moved through the snow and there were footprints afterwards. I just thought that was incredible. Also, there's a film called Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I had to look at my notes because I always forget what it's called because nobody's seen it. And it was a 3D version of Final Fantasy that was made and bombed. Nobody watched it. But that also, I just remember watching that and there's a shot where you see from underneath her and she's like stepping on this rippled pool. And it just blew my mind because you can't do that in real life, but you can do that in 3D. So from then on, I was kind of like fascinated with this idea of 3D. And I toyed around with it a little bit whilst in school. I downloaded Maya and bought these like really old books I found the other day from like 2003 or something. I had to import them from the US because you couldn't get them here, and tried to learn a bit of 3D through that and didn't. And now I've been doing it for kind of 9 years, I guess, according to my PowerPoint. So yeah, I'm a modeling and texturing artist. So I model and texture 3D things. So if something is needed in a film that you can't have in real life, then we'll make it, whether that's a digital version of an actor that needs to get killed because they can't kill the actor, or like a sheep that needs to blow up. These are not things I've done, but like those are for some reason the first things that come to my head, or like aliens and stuff that you can't do in real life. Visual effects basically is anything that you can't replicate in camera. Christopher Nolan always talks about doing special effects for his films, like they like to do explosions and stuff like that, and then we'll add stuff that they can't do in real life on the computer. So that's what visual effects basically is. Yeah. And I teach it online now in my spare time, and kind of like to kind of help people as well. Yeah, so next slide, I guess. Oh, I've worked on a few films. Okay, cool. So this is the list of ones that I can remember. The first film I worked on was Cinderella, the remake that they made, and then kind of gone through and done quite a few since. Jungle Book is one of my favorite ones because it won an Oscar, and it's also, it was really cool because a lot of films you'll be doing stuff in the background, which is fine, but Jungle Book was one of the first films that was just entirely, not the first one, but like one of the first like, big Disney budget films that was just entirely CG apart from the little kid. So we could go into the cinema and be like, we made that. So that's one of the proudest moments of my career, I'd say. And yeah, and the last year I've been working on this show at the bottom right, which you can see. This is the only image they've released of it, but it's called Oni. It's going to be on Netflix this year, and it looks dope. So I would recommend looking out for that. It's really cool. Actually, no, yeah, a little anecdote with this one. So this program is made by Tonko House, which is it's directed by a guy called Dice Tatsumi. And when I was at uni, actually, studying visual effects, which we'll get onto in a second, he released a film called The Dam Keeper, which was a little short, and it got nominated for the Oscar at the time for Best Animated Short. And it was one of those things that really inspired me at uni to like be a better artist. And so working with him this last year was kind of like quite a nice full circle moment, something that really kind of pushed me to get to where I am today. And then working directly with him and talking to him on meetings and stuff like that was pretty cool. So, sorry, I just need to make sure my notes scroll with me as well. Next slide. Oh, okay, so this is a little flashy showreel of stuff I've worked on just to kind of demonstrate it a little bit better. Yes, that's me. If you have any, I mean, hundreds of people worked on those films as well, but those specific assets were some of the things that I helped create. If you've got any questions about those at the end, then I'm more than happy to talk about projects individually, but I just thought I'd give a visual kind of overview of what a modeling and texturing artist might get up to in their professional career. So, no, we're done, cool. So, what is VFX? How long is it? As I said, VFX is kind of anything that you can't do in camera, so you do on your computer afterwards. So that can be 2D, that can be 3D. So that could be like painting out wires when an actor is doing a stunt that they can't safely do without some sort of harness, or that could be making. I can't think of any monsters off the top of my head, but monsters in your favorite sci-fi TV show, whatever, stuff like that. So how long has VFX been around for? So the first film to use VFX was Tron back in 1982, when none of you were born and I was minus 10 years old. But and it looks like crap, right? But it was incredibly difficult to do it back then. They had to program everything. You didn't have like a viewport to view it in real time. They were like kind of writing what the shape should look like and then render it and hope. Yeah, and so that was the first one that kind of kicked it all off. And then Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 were some of the big ones that sort of paved the way for Hollywood CGI blockbusters that we're used to these days. So the T-Rex in that, obviously, and then in Terminator 2, the guy like walks through a jail cell and turns to silver, or something like that, I don't know. So yeah, and that kind of set the stage for what we're used to these days, the kind of films like the Marvel films and whatnot. So when is CGI used? It's basically used all the time these days. A lot of people will complain that there's too much CGI in films or CGI ruins everything, but it doesn't, because the amount of visual effects that people don't realize that are going on in the background is insane, whether that's making a actor look slightly less heavy or removing like crow's lines from people. Like, these are things that people don't assume happens, but there's so much VFX in basically every single shot in films these days, or like background replacements, or just really simple things like that, or it could be a giant fire-breathing dragon from Game of Thrones, stuff like that. And then how is it created? There's so many different ways, but usually the kind of general workflow is we'll use high-end graphic programs on high-end PCs, both in 2D and 3D. So you might be in a 3D working space, or you might just be looking at a flat image that's been filmed on set. And it's sort of like Photoshop, but on steroids. You're doing all these extra kind of things. And there's lots of different ways to sort of make the same effect, which is why problem solving is actually one of the skills that I end up using the most. And kind of when I go and talk to uni students or people wanting to get into it, I'm like, you need to work out how to be a problem solver, because it's actually one of the most important skills. And at times horrendous, but quite fun as well. Yeah, so VFX career options. Let's talk about those. So obviously there's VFX in like films and stuff like that. This is what I do. I've worked on films and TV, but generally I've kind of found myself in the film industry. So inside of that, there's a lot of different departments. So I specialize specifically in something called modeling and texturing, so making 3D models and 3D textures. Texturing being like painting that model when it's done. If you sort of think about it, the analogy I like to use is puppeteering, like making a real world puppet. So somebody has to like kind of carve it out of wood, that's modeling. Somebody then has to paint that puppet so it looks cool. Then somebody's going to attach the strings, and that's rigging, and that's basically making it so that your 3D model has the ability to move like a real life object would. Animation is then moving the strings of that puppet, and then compositing doesn't really fit into the analogy metaphor, but compositing is kind of throwing that all together, especially with films, with the footage so that everything looks real, so that when cinema goers see it, they don't think anything's weird. But yeah, that's kind of VFX, film VFX. You also get feature animation. So when I was at uni, I actually studied 3D animation rather than VFX myself, because I grew up enamored by like Pixar films and stuff like that. So there didn't used to be a Pixar on the corner of every London street, but these days there's actually a lot more feature animation done in the UK because of like tax breaks and stuff like that. So it is absolutely a viable career in the UK now, and also because a lot of kids' TV is 3D animation. So that's another career option. Yeah, so it's basically the same as above, but everything is done on the computer. So it's actually kind of cool because you get a lot more ownership on it. I recently, the only show that I've been working on for Netflix, the Netflix show, that was feature animation. And we had to make everything. That's every single tree, every blade of grass, every rock. So sometimes the jobs are a little bit boring, but they're also a bit boring in film as well. Like I've made many a lamppost. Yeah, and then also, so we've got video games, real-time VR, and stagecraft. So these are the kind of things that the more sort of burgeoning like fringes of VFX. Obviously, everybody knows what video games are. Obviously, there are courses for video games as well, but the skills are transferable. You're still working in 3D. You're still using similar packages, like 3D programs, to make the same things. Just you need to have a slightly different skill set, and so they are transferable. You could jump across if you put in a bit of time to learn that stuff. Obviously, we have real-time, which used to just be video games, but now that can be anything and everything. That can be experiences. That can be, if you go to a concert, they might have real-time, like Unreal Engine stuff running the visuals in the background so that they can kind of react to the music. We've got VR, obviously. That's only getting bigger, and that kind of runs in with the real-time video game stuff. And then stagecraft, which is, I don't know if anybody's seen like The Mandalorian or like the new kind of Disney Plus films. So there's a lot of articles about this online, and I don't know the ins and outs of it too well, but basically stagecraft is where they're now, instead of filming everything in front of a green screen, because when you do that, you'll sometimes notice in really bad productions, the edges of the characters will look a little bit green because it's something that you sort of have to remove because of all the fill light. It's just, like all that green is just bouncing around the room and it makes the actors look green. So what stagecraft is doing is they're basically just putting these giant panels behind them and then projecting these 3D real-time environments so that when the camera moves, they move as well. And it means that all the lighting is a lot more accurate, and it's also cheap because you just all do it. Well, it's not cheap because the technology is crazy expensive, but it's cheaper than flying everyone out to Morocco to pretend that it's Tatooine or whatever. So yeah, there's many options, and then yeah, video games, ads and ArchViz and stuff like that. Those are also kind of like different niches. So I've done a few ads. I like freelance projects here and there that I've sort of picked up. I worked on a Nike internal project for some shoes. I worked on an Adidas Alexander Wang campaign, one time. They were just random like emails I got from people. They're like, we need 3D people, can you help? And I could, and it was cool, and the money was really good. And actually, sometimes the more niche industries, which sometimes like archviz and stuff like that is kind of boring. You're like modeling the interiors of houses for like real estate property companies to put on their websites, but they pay really well. So there's also that. And then finally, there's also like weird other stuff. I've been asked to, I'm not going to say what because you guys are young, but I've been asked to work on some really weird stuff in my time, which I have declined, I would like to mention. So yeah, that's me. A little bit of backstory behind that, so I'm just going to move my slides on. That's when I graduated university in 2013. I was incredibly sick with food poisoning that day. And I couldn't stand up straight in the cathedral they were holding our thing in, so I was incredibly pale. So when they sent the photos back, I just looked dead. So I put it in Photoshop and made myself look a bit more alive. And then back in the day, long cat was a meme. I'm looking at the teachers to see if they remember that. And so I put a cat on it, and the rest is history. So yeah. I went to the University of Hertfordshire, and like I said, I studied 3D animation, and yeah, learned kind of the tools of the trade there. Sorry, I'm just looking to make sure that I hit all the notes that I want to. Obviously, there's a lot of courses for 3D and stuff like that, and all I would say is just do your research and find something that's right for you. Uni and 3D especially are really hard, and I hear a lot of, like, I've heard in my time a lot of students complain. They're like, oh, uni didn't teach me everything, or blah, blah, blah. It is a difficult course. I will say that up front. I absolutely love it. I can't imagine myself doing many other things, and when it's good, I absolutely love my job. But yeah, I had to put in a lot of extra work because teachers can only teach you certain amounts. So it does take a little bit of kind of self-motivation to be able to kind of get through a 3D course, but yeah, it's cool. The stuff I've worked on and the stuff I can do with a computer is pretty cool, so I really like it. But yeah, there is a large amount of self-learning versus my friends. I remember when I was at uni, my friends doing like English degrees and stuff like that, they'd just be out all the time, and I would also be out all the time, but then I'd have to get up really early the next morning to like set off renders and like get my projects done and stuff like things like that. So yeah. I will say, if you guys end up going to uni, when you go to uni, one of my top tips would be that you should make connections. You will make connections. You'll make some really good friends there. I still talk to a lot of people that I went to uni with to this day. I've worked with quite a few of them. And you'll hopefully make some lifelong friends. I think also, I was quite a shy kid when I would first meet people, and now I think like going to uni kind of flip that around for me because you're just forced to meet so many people. And if you do go to uni, I was that person in the first week that didn't really want to go out because I was anxious. I just wanted to play Fallout New Vegas, which came out that week. I was really like scared of like going out and doing it, but like those were my formative years, and you will have an amazing time, whatever you end up studying. Because uni's really cool. And also you're lucky COVID era's kind of gone, so hopefully you won't have too much remote learning, whereas people that have gone before you lost out a lot of that. And one of the best things uni teaches you is kind of those socializing, but also like the connections that you make and what you learn. Speaking of which, when you go to uni, take advantage of everything you learn. Words cannot describe how much I miss just full-time being able to learn things. Obviously, at my job, I do learn things these days, but I kind of don't get to pick. Your modules and stuff will decide sort of what you're learning. But you have all this extra time to kind of take in as much knowledge as you can and sort of work out what you want to do for the rest of your life. Like work out, like I was saying, there's a lot of different departments in VFX, and usually you do sort of specialize in one. They will hire you to do usually one specific thing. And it's just really cool to try a little bit of everything. Again, another complaint I hear from students is they're like, oh, I just want to do animation, and they're making me model and stuff. And yeah, sure, that sucks if your heart is set on one thing, but you might learn some new skills and realize that wasn't actually for you. But also, I remember I had to like write a dissertation on SpongeBob. My dissertation was on the film Avatar, if anybody remembers that film. But I had to write a 2,000-word essay on SpongeBob and the like gender politics of it. And it was awesome. It was so cool, like just talking about like queer theory with SpongeBob, because there's a lot to talk about there. And learning all these theories, and I'm trying to remember what else, and like Finding Nemo, I had to look at it through like a communist lens, I think. I don't know. There's just a lot of things that you're like, oh, this is bullshit. Why are they teaching me this stuff? And I had a lot of people on my course complaining. They're like, I didn't come here to write essays. But honestly, you will learn so much random information, and it just comes back to you one day, and you'll be like at a party talking to somebody about the queer theory of SpongeBob. So yeah, take advantage of that. Uni's so cool, and I'm really jealous of you guys getting to do it all again. It's cool. Yeah, and it's also the reason I got my first job. Another kind of rhetoric I see online, especially with VFX, people are like, oh, do I have to go to a uni? And I don't really have they're like, oh, I can just learn it from YouTube. And sure, absolutely. But if you have the motivation, maybe you could do that. I know personally I wouldn't be able to do that. I need deadlines. But also, it set me up really well. Like I was saying, it gave me a really good experience, like ground knowledge in a lot of things. And my first job out of uni, I'll touch on this in a minute, wasn't actually what I do these days, but it was because I had a broad knowledge, and then I've been able to leverage that into now what I actually wanted to do. So yeah, after uni, my first job, as I said, it was a really cool company. They're called Blue Zoo. They do kids animation mainly, but a lot of adverts and some non-kind of kids animation. And they got in contact with me after uni. They're like, we've seen you a showreel. We need people to do lighting and rendering. And I wanted to be, at the time, just a modeling artist, so just making 3D models. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I got one other offer from a company to be a runner, which is basically you wash up dishes and you get coffee for people. And the salary was like 14K, which in London is not enough to live on. So it was either that or do a job I didn't want to do. So it was either be able to pay my way or not enjoy paying my way. So I decided to take that job, and I did it for 6 months, and it was kind of just that stepping stone that I needed, and I was able to, then my CV had something on it. I was like, I've got some experience, I sort of know what I'm doing, and then I was able to kind of like jump to my next role, which was, I worked at a company called MPC, Moving Picture Company, which is in Soho, and they're a big film company, you name it, they've worked on it. But I was hired as a grooming artist, which is such a horrible term to tell your parents you've got a job in. So I was hired as a groomer, and so that means digital hair and fur. So I was basically a digital hairdresser, which I was really excited to do, to be honest, because the way their structure worked is they had a build department, which is modeling, texturing, and grooming, and I wanted to get into modeling, so I was like, you know what, I'll take this job, I'll be able to work my way over into the modeling department. I was not able to, but I got the experience at a really big film company then, and I got to work on Jungle Book, and so those wolves that you saw on my show reel, I groomed that wolf. And that was, still to this day, I've never cried watching a film, but I remember they put on that I've worked on, like out of pride, apart from that one, they put on a screening at the IMAX in London, and for the entire company, and I was just sat there like sobbing the entire way through, because it was just the most like, you did it, kid, sort of moment, which was great. So yeah, it wasn't the right job for me at the moment, but I stayed there for a couple of years, and then decided that, you know what, I kept asking to move over and they wouldn't move me over. They're like, you're kind of good at this. Why would we move you when we could just hire other people to do this other job you want to do? Because it was quite a niche position, grooming. Not that many people at the time did it. So I was like, well, F this, I'm out. So I decided that I took a bit of a leap of faith and quit my job after being there for nearly 2 years. And was like, I'm just going to work on my showreel in my spare time and hopefully get a role that I wanted to. So yeah, 10 plus years later, so I graduated in 2013, sorry. So we're on 22. So I guess I started uni in 2010. So it is 10 plus years later. So getting the job I wanted, I finally got there. So after I sort of took that leap of faith, I was able to take some time off because I'd saved a bit of money. I took a couple of months off and just worked on my showreel. So in VFX, that thing you saw at the beginning is kind of your calling card. They'll look at your CV to make sure that you've worked at places and you've got a bit of experience. When you're going for kind of more senior roles, they want to make sure that you know what you're doing. But the showreel is the thing that you need to make. And if you do study it at uni, the showreel will be the thing that you're kind of aiming towards at the end of those 3 years to make a calling card to send to recruiters and be like, hey, hire me. So yeah, I worked on my showreel for a couple of months and managed to get hired by a company called DNEG, Double Negative, which is also in central London. And I thought they wouldn't tell me the role they were hiring me as. They're like, you're just going to be a generalist, which kind of means you do a little bit of everything. So I assumed they were going to get me to do grooming, because in my showreel it was mainly grooming. And I sort of lied to them when I started working there. They're like, oh, you know how to groom, right? Because they don't really talk to each other, the recruitment and I was like, no, I don't really know how to do that. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. How about you model and texture? I was like, sick, okay. So I ended up texturing on Fantastic Beasts, the first one. And I had a really cool supervisor who I kind of showed what I was worth, and they just had me doing background characters, and they were like 1 pixel on the screen. They're like, hey, texture this guy that gets obliterated by some magic or whatever. I was like, okay, did that. They liked it. They're like, oh, the hero character in it, his name, there's a guy that kind of gets flung about in the sky in a flag or something. I think he gets murdered by the Obscurus. They're like, oh, do you want to texture the Digijub of this? It was kind of a step up. I was like, okay, cool, did that. They're like, how about you texture the main villain? I was like, okay, cool. And then the Thunderbird, which is the big flying bird in it. They're like, you've kind of proven your worth. How about you make this? And that was my first like texturing film. And it was another thing that I did well and was able to kind of set me up for the rest of my career because it's on my showreel now. And I'm like, I can do this. And that was just because I'd kind of worked my ass off, but also proven myself a little bit. Then I moved to Canada. That's a big old tree that I was stood on. So one of the cool things about VFX is at the moment it's like super international, super worldwide. And DNEG had an office in Vancouver, and I was having a really rough time in London at the time. Like our landlord was like trying to kick us out because they wanted to sell the flat, so I didn't really know where I was going to be living. We just finished Fantastic Beasts, and they had me working on some really boring show. So I mentioned one Friday to my artist manager who kind of like looks after you. I was like, oh, I heard you've got an office in Canada. That'd be kind of cool. And they're like, we need people. Do you want to go now? And they're like, take the weekend to think about it. So on Monday, I was like, yeah, I didn't even research it. It was so bad. Didn't even research Canada. I was like, yeah, that looks cool. Because my friend kept posting, he lived in Vancouver, and he kept posting pictures of his flat. And basically there, your money goes a bit further, so you can afford your own flat. That was the only reason I moved to Canada, so that I could live by myself. And I lived there and on Monday signed the papers and had like got it all sorted within a week, and was there within the month. So I worked in Canada for a couple of years, which was awesome. It was kind of everything I hated about London, I liked about Canada, but also everything I hated about Canada, I missed about London. Like it was super naturey and stuff like that, but the going out and like socializing scene just wasn't the same. So I ended up coming back to England, also just like for some personal reasons, like it was just too far away from everyone that I knew. So I was like, it was a fun experience, do that for a couple of years and came back. And then actually I went back to uni myself. Last week I graduated. I went back and did a part-time diploma at the National Film and Television School in writing because I've been doing this for a while and I enjoy it, but there are other things that I sort of really enjoy in life. So I was like, hey, I've got some spare time. Let's go back and learn some new things. So I was doing that once a week, doing more lessons because, yeah, I just really like learning things, which is, I think, why I enjoyed uni. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just going to move my slide notes. So life as a VFX artist, kind of what are you actually doing? So basically, the way a day sort of works, you kind of get into work or you log on these days. Thankfully, the world is opening up a bit more, so the social aspects that are really cool with VFX are kind of coming back. And then you'll be working on, production will have assigned you something. They'll be like, hey, you need to work on this specific asset. Because I work in modeling and texturing, we usually work on a singular asset. In other departments, you might be working on like a scene from the film, like if you're an animator, they'll be like, we need you to animate this person running through the burning fire and stuff like that. But for me, I'll be working on a specific building, a specific character, a specific vehicle, whatever it is. And then every day we'll have something called rounds, which is usually where production kind of come around with the supervisor just over your shoulder. They'll just be like, hey, how are you getting on? Have you got enough time? We need this done by X. And just check that everything's going round. And then you'll have something called dailies. Dailies is basically you go into a dark room, sort of like this. And the supervisor, so the visual effects supervisor, who's like the highest on the film, will look at your work. You'll kind of present it to them, so you'll make sort of like a few sort of turnarounds of the asset. Just show it from different angles, show it versus the reference of what that person or vehicle looked like on set if you're trying to recreate something, or if there's a concept that you're working from. So the Thunderbird on Fantastic Beasts, the art director was in-house and she had given us concepts, so I was kind of showing those up on screen versus how it was looking. And then you'll get feedback on that, and it will either get approved, and it will be like, yep, green tick, that's going in the movie, or they'll be like, sorry, go back, we need you to change this, or the clients have changed their mind, they actually want this. So this happened. The bird was like white and gold halfway through the film. They're like, but we actually want it to be blue and black now. It was like that horrendous dress. Anyway, no, that's too old a reference. So for a week, we thought this bloody bird had to be like a different color, and it just completely upended everything. And so I just had to go back to the drawing board and start again, which was a bit of a defeating moment. But they ended up actually really liking it, and it turned out they didn't want it black and blue. It was a miscommunication from the clients. But he turned into a stormy version during the film, so we did end up using that black and blue version for a little bit. And then, you'll kind of address notes and then do it all over again. And then as you grow, your kind of seniority grows, and I think there's a stupid picture here. But for a long time, you're just like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And still to this day, I don't really know what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll get asked like random questions about like really scientific color space or like how the monitors kind of display images. I don't know, I'm not that techie. But I think if you have a bit of humility and you're just like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, then you're fine. Sometimes people lie and they're like, oh, no, and you can tell they're bullshitting. So yeah, that's kind of what a VFX artist is. Like it looks quite flashy, the final product, but you are working in an office, hopefully with some really cool people, going out to the pub on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whenever it is. Yeah, it's cool. So pros and cons of being a VFX artist. I feel like online, you will sometimes see and hear people talking about it as if it's like being a VFX artist is God's gift to the world. But at the end of the day, realistically, it is just another job. Everything, you're doing it because you need to pay the bills. That's kind of the capitalist society we find ourselves in. That said, on a good day, I really enjoy my job. So I thought I'm not trying to be too negative on it, but I see it online. People are either really negative or they're really positive about it. And I think there is a nuance to every single job. And I think it's important to kind of just make people aware of that, not to kind of glorify it and then people get into something that they didn't sign up for. So kind of on the pro list, you work on some really cool projects. I've worked on some awesome things. And it's a pretty cool job, like at parties. It can be really cool to tell people what you've worked on. Sometimes people don't care. You either they just look at you blankly, or they like absolutely complete fangirl. They're like, oh my God, tell me everything about this. The cons, it is like realistically, it is just a desk job. It looks kind of fancy and stuff like that, but you are at an office, you're at a desk, you're at a computer. Some people get to go on set if you're working like with more stagecrafty, like those sort of burgeoning markets, you might be on set doing more sort of exciting things, I say in quotation. But generally, just at a computer all day, going in and out of meetings. So on the pro side, we have job security. It's a really flexible lifestyle. And so when I say that, basically, usually what happens is your contracts are in months rather than like it's quite rare to get a permanent position, especially early on. You might do it when you've worked at a company for a long time. They might offer you permanent. But you are usually contract-based, often either on a film or like 6 months or something. So that can be really cool. Like I finished a job in December and I haven't been working since. So I've had December, January, February, March, and then I go back to work in April. So I've had 4 months off, kind of just doing what I wanted to do. I decided to take some time out and just play video games, get back and do exercise and do some other thing. Like I've been doing this writing course, so I was doing some stuff to do with that as well. And having this job afforded me that. If I was like, I've got friends that work in like, I'm trying to think. I've got a friend she does marketing for a company. I was about to name it, but I don't know if I should. Anyway, she works for a pizza company. But if she took 6 months out of her job, she wouldn't come back to a job. She wouldn't have a job to come back to. And also having a gap on her CV like that wouldn't look great for more traditional industries. Whereas with VFX, they don't blink an eyelid. Like when I went into this interview that I had recently for this new job that's coming up, they didn't even say to me, they asked what I'd been up to the last few months, but they weren't like, oh, I see here, you've like, why did you have like a breakdown? What happened? But no, I just want to take some time out. The cons of that are that I probably should have put them the other way around because it seems really I'm ending on a negative, but it can be a little bit scary financially, especially to begin with. These days, I kind of tell when I'm talking to students at uni, I do say to them, just when you can, obviously, to begin with, the salaries start low, but when you're able to save money, put a few months aside because you never know what can happen. If a film gets cancelled or COVID hits, the entire industry, you might find yourself without a job. It's only happened to me once, thankfully, and it was because of COVID. But also, I was not the only person in that boat, and the VFX industry was not the only industry in that boat. It just so happened that film was hit really heavily by it. So yeah, pros and cons to that. So I do suggest I think this comes up on a later slide, just save a bit of money when you can. So pros, I think in general we have it better than other industries. So I've put at the bottom here, take Reddit with a pinch of salt. The reason I say that, if anybody's ever been on, there's a subreddit called RVFX, and it's just the most negative people in the world. And I get it, like some companies suck and some jobs suck. I've worked at a couple of awful companies that I'm not going to name, but and I get that it's like easy to go online because you can't vent at work. It's easy to go online and like be like, this VFX sucks. I hate everything. Like, this is an awful career. Like, don't do. Then they say, people will be like, I want to go and study VFX. And I'm like, don't do it. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. And to that, I have to say, get your head out of the sand a little bit, because yeah, sure, sometimes you have like late nights. The pay sucks a little bit at the beginning, or it can suck depending if you're like a runner or something. But so my brother's a graphic design artist. He used to work at a packaging company, doing like packaging for food that you find in Tesco's or whatever. And I don't think I've ever stayed later at work than 10:30, and that was at the end of Fantastic Beasts. We had a few weeks of like quite late nights just trying to get it out, and it was never later than 10:30. He would on the regular be staying in the office till 1 a.m. getting flour approved by Tesco's or whoever his client was, because they didn't like the kerning on the font or whatever, I don't know, graphic design things. So people might complain about it, but I think you do just kind of have to take that into the kind of wider world. Like teachers, for example, like I've got a few friends that are teachers, and sometimes when we sat there like moaning, I'll be like, oh, this and that, and then they explain what their problems are. I'm like, okay. And I dated a nurse for a bit, and I remember like he told me what he earned, and he was literally saving people's lives, and I was a bit like, okay, yeah, we really like, I don't know, anyway, like the NHS and stuff, they're basically, yeah, sure, it can suck sometimes, but VFX, I think, generally has it better than other industries. Salary gets pretty good to begin with. Sorry, towards the end. So I feel like, again, this isn't something that's really spoken about, but I like to kind of be honest with people, so because you study something for 3 years and then you're like, but wait, what do I actually get paid? So kind of the, obviously I started a long time ago, but pay hasn't really gone up that much versus inflation. So your kind of like starting salary is about 23,000 if you get in at sort of a film company. And then so a junior, you'll be looking to earn about 23 to maybe 30-ish thousand pounds. Mid-level can be anywhere between like 30 and maybe 60. And then for a senior artist, that can be upwards of 70K. And then supervisors, the people at the top, they might be in six figures. They kind of, if you're a good soup and you've got good kind of relationships with a client, like there's a soup at DNEG, I remember that he was like the Christopher Nolan soup, like Christopher Nolan always came back for that one guy, so I'm assuming he was setting his own salary, I don't know. But yeah, so it pays really well. But also if you wanted to get into an industry for money, you'd be a banker, I guess, because then you'd be getting paid off the charts. It can be a little bit difficult to break into early on. It can be a little bit competitive, and the way the industry works is it will really hire up when a lot of films need to be made, but when there aren't a lot of films being made, which is usually in the summer because all the blockbusters have come out, so there's a bit of a lull, which is often when VFX students graduate. So those first few months can be quite difficult to get into, and sometimes it can take, I know people that it took a year, if not longer, to actually get a job in VFX. And that's just kind of the cyclical nature of the industry, adds a bit of luck to it. And also, if you graduate and your show reel isn't the best, then you might need to work on it for a little bit longer to be able to get your foot in the door, and that's just the realities of it. But also, I think when I say it's difficult to break in, I think if you have enough skill, anybody can get in. It just takes a little bit of luck and timing, I think. But I'll talk about that more in a minute. Pros, the ability to travel. Like I've lived in Canada. There's a huge industry at the moment in Canada for filming because of all the tax breaks. All the American productions go up there to shoot stuff. So you'll often see Vancouver dressed up as other cities in films. And having lived there, I'm like, oh, I used to get coffee from there, but they're pretending it's New York and it's not. So that's a really cool aspect. Not that many jobs, and because also as a VFX artist, I'm classified as highly skilled for a lot of other visas in the world. You kind of get fast-tracked through, and you can get a visa quite easily if you've been doing it for a few years. When you first graduate, it might not happen, but yeah. And that's a really awesome aspect of it. Cons, you can kind of only live where the work is. Obviously, that's changed now with hybrid. That's changed now with remote working because of COVID. But before that, you could only sort of live in the hub cities where productions were made. So that's sort of London. There's a little bit around the UK, like there's a little bit in Bristol because of Aardman Animation, and there's a games cinematic company there, and there's one in Glasgow. But most of the stuff is done in London, and then we've got Vancouver, Montreal, San Francisco used to be a huge one, and New York, but that's died down a lot and become mainly advertising these days. And then Australia has boomed at the moment because a few years ago the government created tax breaks. And what I say when I mean that is basically they're like, come and shoot your film here and we will give you 20% of everything you spend, we'll give you it back because it gets so many jobs and stuff made here. So the government did it in the UK years ago. I think it was when the first Star Wars film was sort of being filmed. There was in the news, I think it was David Cameron at the time, set all these tax breaks to make it cheaper for film companies basically to come here rather than shoot everything in Hollywood. And so when that happens, jobs creep up. So it can wax and wane in different cities, but that can be a con to some people, or it can be a pro versus the ability to travel. And then pros and cons, I think this is quite a sort of important one to mention, just because I was having this conversation with my housemate the other day. It's quite a niche industry, and that's really good because I've got a very specific set of skills which will make me employable in those things because I've got the experience and I'm quite good at them now. But also it's quite niche. If the film industry were to fall apart tomorrow, I'm not going to get a job filling in Excel spreadsheets because I don't have those skills. So it kind of puts you on one path versus people that like study like philosophy or English at uni. They can kind of go out and apply to a lot of different things, whereas with VFX, you're sort of applying to the studios that make films or make games or make ads. But if you studied VFX, chances are you know that anyway, and that's what you want to do, so that's fine. But I just thought it's worth mentioning. Yeah, sorry, that was a little bit dry. But yeah, so now in the future, it's been a weird couple of years. And this industry especially is super young. Like if Tron came out in 82, then what's that, 40 years old, this industry? Which is crazy when you think about like publishing or newspapers or like more kind of old-timey professions, I don't know what you call them, or like teaching. That's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but not as a job. But like people have been doing that for a long time. VFX has been going for 40 years, which is crazy. And because of that, it means that the industry changes a lot. You are learning so many cool things because the technology changes. So I'm constantly like having to adapt and learn new techniques, and that's so cool. And also, if you look at a film from 40 years ago versus a film now, they look so different because the technology has advanced with that, and you just make cooler and cooler things. That's what I think. But yeah, obviously, like COVID and stuff has changed those things and has changed the way the industry has had to adapt to that. I remember before COVID happened, we never dreamt of being able to work from home, and a lot of people would love to because commuting in London, I live in London, commuting in London is the worst. It can add on like an extra hour to your day easily. And then there was all this talk of hushed like lockdown. They're like, oh, it never happened, it never happened. But then the government literally made it illegal for them to work from, to not work from home, and the industry just had to react like that overnight. So they were like setting up all these VPNs so that like Marvel stuff didn't leak from home and stuff like that. But also your life is going to change. Like you might study VFX now, and you might, in 5 years, might realize that it's not for you. And I don't want to discredit that because I don't think that's necessarily a wrong choice. My housemate, she used to be in VFX. We met at my first job, and she switched around a bit. So she was an artist. She was doing like effects, which is like kind of explosions and stuff like that. She decided it wasn't for her, so she moved into production, which are the people kind of keeping the spreadsheets and making sure that everything's in order. She realized it wasn't for her, so she moved back, and she was like, actually, VFX isn't for me. And now she's studying again at uni. She's currently on a PhD, doing psychology and doing MRI scans for people with depression, doing a PhD in that, which is wild. And that's okay, because she also, like, although I said VFX is really niche, it teaches you some really important skills, like talking to people, being able to take notes and like address things, and just like really important soft skills, but also problem solving. And yeah, you'll learn so many core skills that she was able to translate into a PhD in looking at people's brains. And like me myself, I was getting a little bit fed up with VFX at one point, so I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to go back and study writing at a uni. And weirdly, it sounds stupid, but those two things have really helped each other, because I've learned some skills from that, but also being able to take like this stuff I know from VFX weirdly translated well into other things. So I just thought that was important to talk about because I don't know, even if you feel like you might have gone down the wrong path, I think you always are learning something, and that's just the stream of conscious ramblings there. Anyway, but also at the moment, there is a huge need for talent, especially with kind of COVID lifting. There's a huge amount of content going on like Disney Plus, Netflix, all that stuff. TV shows, Game of Thrones kind of just started this trend of just having amazing VFX in TV, and now you're seeing it all the time, like The Witcher, all the Star Wars things on Disney Plus. And it's just booming. So now more than ever, talent is needed, and there's a huge shortage, especially in London at the moment, for skilled artists. So now is the perfect time to get into it. And the UK industry for entertainment in general, like TV, film, is just massively growing because there's been all this investment. And because people were stuck at home and only had TV to watch and only had games to play and stuff like that. So yeah, it's only going to get bigger, and with things like VR and whatnot, it's just huge. I can't remember what's next. So this was a slide. I realized most of you guys are from aren't actually studying it, but I just wanted to give some advice in case there is anybody that has graduated. And I don't know if this is being recorded, if they want to watch it later. But this is just some advice to, or when you guys graduate, if you want to watch us back in 3 years, whatever. Have a LinkedIn account. If you are a VFX graduate, have a LinkedIn account. It's really important it's where recruiters and stuff post what jobs are going. If you're in second year of uni, I recommend making a LinkedIn account because internships, which usually you can only apply for in your second year of uni, they will post about them on LinkedIn. I did an internship at Framestore, which is the company that made, it's an old film now, but Gravity, the one with Sandra Bullock in space. So I interned at that company during that, and I saw the opportunity on LinkedIn and applied through their website, but I wouldn't have seen that that's where jobs get posted mostly. So have a LinkedIn account. I'm not going to go on about showreels too much, but because there's loads of information about this online. But sorry, this is a bit technical. But if you're a texturing artist, learn Mari. Don't use Substance and Smart Mask all the time. I know it's really fun to see the sliders move and stuff, but it doesn't teach you. You should know Mari and Substance, and this is a rant I go on about way too much. Yeah, if you are making a modeling showreel, do an interesting asset. Like, I don't want to see just a chair. I want to see something with a little bit of character. I want to see something complex that kind of shows your abilities. Yeah, just make your pieces interesting. Have a story. Always put your best piece first, and don't make the showreel longer than 1.5 minutes because it's boring. And I know some unis make you do like random things like drawing or photography, like different modules. Just don't put those in your showreel. You might have a module where it tells you to make a showreel, include those things. Don't do it when you're applying to jobs. Do it to get your degree, absolutely, but after that, it doesn't matter. They don't want to see it. And it might take, like I was saying earlier, it could take you a little while to get in. Obviously, the industry is booming at the moment. That might change. It always goes kind of in waves. If it's a busy time for the industry, a lot of people will be hiring. If it's not, then you might have to wait a few months. Yeah, don't give up. Work on your showreel. It could also be the thing holding you back rather than the industry not hiring at the moment. So go away, learn some more, and then reapply with that new showreel. Also, if you do start having a conversation with a recruiter, send them your reel, and then if after 6 months you've improved it, you can be like, hey, remember me? I've actually made this new piece. Would you mind looking at it? I realize that probably isn't going to apply to many of you here, but I just wanted to put that in here so that, because I think it's important information. Yeah, so this is some stuff. Again, I do talk to, I've got a Discord online where I kind of give advice to people. And I've gone and given similar talks at other places as well. And some of the stuff that I feel like isn't spoken about online and it's just like kind of general life advice that I sort of wanted to bestow. Everything I say is not necessarily true. Obviously, it worked for me, like I'm here where I am. There's this thing called survivorship bias, and I find it really interesting. It doesn't apply with VFX as much, but you'll see like interviews of like Lady Gaga winning an Oscar, and she's like, all I had to do was follow my dreams, and I got here. And yeah, she did, and she got there. But also there'll be other people that didn't make it there by doing a similar process. And I see it online, people that are like kind of, they have really good positions in the industry, and they're kind of like, you just kind of have to do this, this, and this, but like that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And I think kind of listen to what everybody says, but also it might not be the thing that works for you, which is, I don't know, anyway. Jack of all trades, master of none. So like I was saying, uni sets you up really well to kind of learn, you kind of learn a base level of a lot of things, and a lot of people are really reluctant to kind of learn all those things. Oh no, that's the next one, sorry. people are kind of reluctant to learn these things. They're like, oh, I just want to do this. And that's great, but like I was saying earlier, knowing those other things might get you a job. They might get you closer to where you want to go to. You probably won't end up with your dream job when you graduate uni. Lord knows I didn't. It took me probably 4 years to be doing modeling and texturing as my role, which is what I wanted to do. I did some cool things along the way, but not my dream job. And that's fine. That's just the natural progression of climbing up a career ladder. So yeah, learning a few other things might help. And I just kind of wanted to mention that because some people, are like, if they're like a professional modeler, they might be like, only model, which again, worked for them, but doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So having a really good understanding in a lot of things is only going to help you, I would say. This one kind of, just don't be a dick. Like I was saying earlier, make connections. There are people that I've worked with, especially in the VFX industry, because it's a really small industry. There are people that I've worked with that if I was asked, because often a recruiter will come to you and they'll be like, oh, you worked at this place with this person at the same time. Should we hire them? If they were great, I'm going to be like, yeah, absolutely get them in. They're amazing. If they weren't, hell no, hard pass. And I've heard of people that didn't get jobs specifically because of their reputation. Like they've walked into an interview and somebody's got up and gone straight to HR and they're like, are you interviewing that person? They're like, yep. They're like, absolutely not. And they explain why, and that person doesn't get a job. And I know nepotism or whatever is bad, but also sort of your reputation is one of the most important things in VFX. Like if somebody knows that you worked really well on a project with them, then of course they're going to want you, like they know you're good at your job. And so for that reason, don't be a dick. Don't be that guy in the office that everyone dislikes. Don't argue with people. Just don't be a dick and make connections because it's so important. Like I was saying, I worked on a night campaign for someone, and this was during COVID. I just lost my job because of COVID. And I had to find a way to get income. And a guy, they gutted our department. They got rid of like 10 people at once. And a guy who had moved from New York to London specifically for this job was also let go, unfortunately. But I think we talked on the last 2 days. We only met each other the last week of our jobs. And we got properly chatting on the last 2 days. And yeah, a couple of weeks after, he's like, hey, I've got a gig working on this night campaign. It pays £400 a day. Do you want to do it? I was like, yeah. So I did that for like 2 weeks and earned like 3 months salary. I can't remember how much it was. It was crazy. Like it was disgusting. And that's purely because I wasn't a dick at work and I made the connection. And I know making connections makes it sound really sterile and like inorganic. And I'm not saying use people just for connections, but just make friends because you never know what that's going to kind of bring later down the road. I've just got a job. I've just got accepted for like kind of my dream job, which I'm not going to say out loud because I don't want to jinx it in case stuff falls through. But I just signed the contract for my dream job. And that is not purely, but because my showreel helped, but it's because I know like at least six people there that all were like, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing. And that got my foot in the door because they were able to say that to a recruiter and they're like, can you get this guy for an interview? Had an interview and then boom, I got the job. And that was not entirely because of the connections, but the connections did not hurt there. Yeah. This one's really important. Do not be too hard on yourself when you graduate. Lord knows I was, or actually at uni as well. At uni, 3D, like I said, 3D is quite a difficult thing, especially if you come from a background with no knowledge of it. So I'd opened Maya a couple of times, which is kind of the main 3D program we use, similar to Blender, if anybody knows what Blender is. I remember like in my first module just like crying down the phone to my mum because we had to make a pod racer. Was like the module and I couldn't do it. And in my mind, I was like, it's going to look like this, and it just looked like shit. I was like, no, I can't do it. I got through, and look where I am now. So that's cool, and it's difficult, especially learning something from scratch. But also, when you graduate, it's a really weird. It's a weird one. You're kind of throughout all your life, you're sort of told the steps to take. It's like, right, you go to primary school, you go to middle school, you go to high school, you go to uni. And it's like, right, cool, do anything you want. Like you graduate and it's like, you choose your own adventure, which is wild. Like you don't have structure, you can kind of do anything and nothing is wrong. And that can also be quite difficult. And you will learn so much. You have to learn like paying council tax and all these like weird things you'd never really think about. And so just don't be too tough on yourself because it's a weird stage in life, being 18 to 21 and like graduating and stuff. There's just a lot of new information. And I kind of wish I could go back and tell myself that because I think I was a bit too hard on myself at times. so like I was saying, especially in VFX, I think it's good life advice in general. But my friend, who's like really good with money, he's always said 6 months. I say 3 months because I'm not as good with money. But when you are able to, when you've kind of got your first, move past your first position, get some savings in the bank. Obviously, I know everyone's situation is different, like financially and stuff like that. But when you are able to save a little bit of money and just have it in the bank so that you can take time off if you want to, or if something does happen and they be like, sorry guys, we're not going to be able to renew your contract when you thought maybe they were going to, you might need just a few weeks where you're not getting paid to just kind of find the next thing. And that does happen. So just general life advice / for VFX, always have 3 months savings if you can in the bank. And yeah, it's just a job. It's just a job. VFX, anything, it's just a job. I've seen way too many good artists burn out doing like crazy hours because they're like, oh, I'm doing this amazing Marvel project, so I'm gonna kill myself on it. I'm gonna work like 16-hour days, even though they didn't ask me to, because they won't ask you to do that. They shouldn't ask you to do that. And then within like 6 months, they're just tired, burnt out, they're jaded, they hate everything. Don't sacrifice a life for any job, is kind of my general advice. Especially with VFX, potentially you're going to be in London. Go out, enjoy London. I remember saying to my dad when I first started, my dad's like the most sensible man you'll ever meet, and I wasn't saving any money when I first moved to London because I was earning nothing. And I was like, Dad, I can't save any money. And he was like, look, you didn't move to London to not enjoy London. He's like, don't worry about it. Go to museums, go out, go enjoy yourself. And yeah, go and have a social life, meet people. Your job is just part of what you do for your life. The rest of it is up to you, and that kind of also defines you. So yeah, VFX is cool, but also it's just a job. If you want to know more, this is my Instagram, this is my YouTube. So like I said, I do stuff on YouTube. So I teach the software predominantly. So modeling and texturing packages, so Maya, ZBrush, Mari, Substance. And I have free tutorials on there, which could, they'll be too in-depth if you aren't really sure to it, although some does teach you it from the beginning to the end. But just looking, if you're maybe interested in VFX, looking at videos like that or other people's, there's some really good content out there. Kind of gives you an idea of what VFX actually is and what you might be doing on a day-to-day basis. And then this is my Instagram where I post stupid stuff about Shrek. Speak of the devil, does anybody have any questions?
Am I Shrek? Who's got questions for Michael then? Oh, one of our own. Hello.
Have you worked on any other scenes in The Boys? It's one of my favourite TV shows.
Have I worked on what, sorry?
The Boys.
Yeah. So the running through scene, I did that.
Did you only do any other scenes?
I did some that didn't make it. So we only worked on the pilot. I worked on it for 6 days. It was the quickest turnaround ever. They were like, hey, we've got this TV show that Amazon's making. We just need a digital double of A-Train. Can you model texture and look dev it in 2 days? And I laughed at them. And they were like, no, we're serious. I was like, okay. So I did that. They showed me the shot as well where like he runs through. If you haven't seen the show, it's bloody fantastic.
You just ruined it, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, it happens within the first 5 minutes. But they showed me where he's like holding the stumps. And I was like, what the am I working on? And then it turned out to be absolutely fantastic. It's so good. I also made a digi-double of Homelander, and maybe I modeled and textured that. I didn't look dev it. So where he blows up the plane at the very end of the pilot, that was using that. And there was a scene with, is it her name Queen Maeve or something, or Maeve or something like that? There was a bit that I'm guessing they cut where she stops a bank robbery, but in the process she accidentally murders all the because like in films like Superman would just like punch them and they'd knock them out and it would be all like very PG. Well, she like kind of just cuts them in half as she's like stopping this bank robbery, which was really funny. I don't know why it didn't make it in. So I worked on the digi-double because she like threw someone across of her for that. But yeah, it was like 6 days. Usually you'd have months on a project, and they were like, get it done.
That's nuts. Who else? There were lots of hands. Kibi, I'm going to try and come to you.
A question from the Yorsworthy animator, which is me. Would texturing a 3D model be a difficult challenge for you, I presume?
Would it be? I mean, I do it as a day job, so at this point, I'm kind of used to it. I find texturing quite easy, and oh, okay. Great question. I'm trying to work out how to show it. Sorry, Shrek. I was so young.
I think you look older there than you do now.
Oh, I'll take that. So I'm just going to mute this. No, Squirtle was actually, I did that for fun. So this is Torterra Large. This is the biggest bloody asset I've ever worked on. And so actually I think when it comes to texturing, usually the more difficult ones are the ones where like technically challenging, because this is the size of a mountain. But it had to hold up in shot because they later in the film they fall down its leg. So we needed to be able to see the leg close up, like full screen. But so everything had to be done to such a high quality. So in VFX, when we're texturing, the way texturing works is you paint it on a flat image, and that sort of wraps around the object, and it's like if you think of sculpture, making something out of chicken wire and then kind of like paper mache on top, that's sort of what we're doing. But because this was so big, it was every single image we used was 8K, which I'd never done before. And we had, I think it was hundreds of images across it. And just processing that amount of data was the wildest thing. Like it would take 2 hours just to export the textures every time we had to. And I was doing that on a daily basis multiple times. So I'd just kind of be sat there like whilst my machine died. So usually it's the bigger assets these days for me anyway. When I was learning to do it, it was everything because it was just, I found it difficult. But these days I've done enough kind of variety that I know how to approach something. Yeah.
Next. Oh, at the front, that's easy to get to. Go on, Sam.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Within your 3D modeling, I'm assuming you use Maya.
Yep.
What's your opinion on Blender?
Ooh, how long do we have? No, so I used to hate Blender, but mainly because of the community of it online. Like, people are really toxic about a 3D modeling package. Sorry, I'm just trying to make it go off this so that it's less dark. Only because people online are like weirdly, like it's a religion. I'm like, it's a piece of software, calm down, guys. And you say, like, somebody's like, I made this in Blender. I'm like, great. Unfortunately, if you want a job, you need to know Maya because nobody uses Blender at the moment. That might change in 10 years. It's not going to change the next year. So you need to know Maya. And you'll say that to somebody and they'll be like, it's as if you offended, like murdered their family in front of them. And they'll just have a go at you. And I'm like, no, like I'm just telling you, weirdly, Blender has this really culty fanboy community around it. So I don't like Blender for that reason. I think it's great. I'm seeing this, I'm kind of realizing lately, or not realizing, but something that like I've been talking to people about. VFX is like, it's weirdly not elitist in any way whatsoever, but there is at least used to be, I think it's changing now with YouTube and stuff like that, but there is a huge amount of kind of financial burden, which usually implies privilege of some sort to be able to learn it, because you need a really expensive computer, you need the software, uni isn't cheap. So there's all these kind of factors that can kind of get in people's ways, even to begin with. And then Blender's kind of come along and disrupted that paradigm just by being free. So I think that's fantastic, and I really, really like that about it. And yeah, I've kind of gone away from the bitness the more I think about that and how it is just opening avenues for people that wouldn't have been able to get in before through no fault of their own. So I think that's fantastic. As a piece of software, I don't really like it. I've tried to open it a couple of times. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, if you like Blender, just don't be a dick online about it. Don't be a dick, because some people are.
Thank you.
No worries.
What's your hand up? Go for it.
I have a question. When you were first learning 3D modeling,
Yeah.
what was some of the biggest hurdles you had to get over, and what helped you overcome them?
It's just the
In
tools,
terms of,
isn't it? Like they're really complex pieces of software. They're really complex, especially Maya. I haven't used Blender, but I'm assuming it's of a similar. Like you're doing very similar things. Especially like if you think about things like Mari, which is a texturing program, is horrendous. I specifically make free content online for Mari because there wasn't good stuff online for it. I was like, people need to know this, but it's and that's not modeling, that's texturing. But in terms of modeling, the fundamentals are quite difficult to grasp. But before that, you need to kind of break through the software, knowing where all the buttons are and just knowing how to do stuff. And so I think that's why YouTube is fundamentally so important for so many people. So my friend, his name's Andrew Hodgson, he does Blender content actually these days. But he has a lot of like Maya videos online and like streams where he makes stuff from scratch. And he's worked on basically every single big Star Wars film you can think of. He's made the spaceships for it. So he's like the hard surface guy. So there is content out there for it. And actually when I was at uni, we kind of only really had digital tutors, which I don't think is a thing anymore, and Gnomon. And those were too expensive to afford. Whereas these days you've got Flip Normals, you've got Railway, you've got all these like cheaper alternatives, and you've got really good free content on YouTube as well. And I think that has probably changed the game a lot. Yeah, hardest thing, I just remember really struggling in the first year of uni, if not through to the second as well. And just not being confident in it as well, because so when I went to uni, I was surrounded by, there was like a group of guys from Lithuania, and they were just so good at 3D modeling, and they were absolutely fantastic. And there was one guy in particular, I remember his pod racer, because we had to make a pod racer in one module. It was just, I was like, that's what I want to do, and I couldn't do it, and that was really defeating. His problem was arrogance. Like he knew the software already. I was like, why did you come to uni if you're not going to learn? And he refused to learn anything new. So what happened is, I see him sometimes on like LinkedIn, and he's not doing anything because he was a dick. Like he was really arrogant. He messaged me actually recently. He's like, hey, can you look at something of mine? Blah blah. I can't remember what he asked me to do. Like promote something. I was like, no, he was so rude to everyone. But also he was unwilling to take on feedback. So even if you are really good to begin with, you need a little bit of humility as well is really important in uni. Sorry, that kind of half answered your question and went on a tangent about something else.
How would you recommend starting out sculpting more complex like creatures and stuff?
So fundamentals are everything. I wish I'd studied anatomy at uni. I was like, I don't need to know anatomy, but I wanted to do characters. Like if you think about any person, like a skull, I was saying this to somebody earlier actually, skulls always have the same ratio, that you might have a longer forehead or whatever, but the space, so if you draw a line from the lower of your ear to your nose, it lines up with your nose on every single person. The middle of your eye always goes down to the edge of your lips. So if you're sculpting a face and that's wrong, even if the eyes are bigger, then the mouth will be wider, but like the skull and the fundamental anatomy there's always the same amount of ribs underneath, for example. And somebody posted something on my Discord recently. They were like, hey, what's wrong with this? I was like, you got 2 extra ribs. Where did they come from? So knowing those fundamentals, they're boring when you just want to sculpt aliens and you're having to like learn like about the bloody tibula and zygonotic process or whatever. I don't think those are things. It's boring, I get it, but the reason like Italian masters were carving people out of like marble is because like anatomy is the fundamental key, especially when it comes to sculpting creatures. And it's the same with creatures as well, actually. Often I'll see people, they're like, I've just made this alien, and it will look basically like a lion, like it will be based on a lion, but none of the anatomy were the same. I'm like, well, you've taken the shape of a lion, so let's make sure that the elbow kind of articulates in the same place. And if you ever watched a movie and the alien doesn't look right, it's usually because you haven't taken inspiration. There's this thing called the uncanny valley, and it's basically like the way the brain kind of interprets things. And if stuff gets too close to the uncanny valley, if like a face doesn't look quite right, it looks really creepy because it's too close. But also, the best alien designs are that you remember, like E.T., I can't think of anything else, or like the alien from Aliens. They're all based on things in real life. Like you can point at that and be like, that's a cricket. Or E.T. is like very humanoid, but just with different proportions. And it works because it's taken inspiration from real life. The aliens you don't remember or you think are weird are often because you have no visual reference to. There was that film, was it Super 8? I feel like there was a film called Super 8. I just remember hating the monster in that, and I think it's because I haven't gone back to watch it. I should, to like reinforce my point. But I think it's because there was nothing it was based on, and it didn't work for that reason. I don't know. Anyway, so always drawing from real life, especially when sculpting, and having a fundamental understanding of anatomy behind you. And there's really good courses for that online. There's a guy called Scott Eaton. They're not the cheapest, but they're bloody fantastic. I did his Anatomy for Artists, which was so good. And there's definitely a million free videos on YouTube, even if it's just for 2D. Like I've watched some of them recently because I've been trying to learn how to do Photoshoppy stuff. And there's so many videos of like dissecting anatomy reference and stuff like that, and that'll be free, 100%. So just getting fundamentals will be really important with that.
Thank you. Next. Hey, other sound.
Oh, I almost forgot my question. Okay. So when it comes to 3D modeling and texturing, how long do you normally get given to model an asset? And like this would be like, so how long would you get given to model a lamppost, and how long would you get given to model your Torterra Lodge?
Yeah. So I worked on Torterra for 6 months on and off, along with other Pokemon. I was like working on like Lickitung's elbow for ages. It was so, it looked, I'm not going to say what it looked like, but it looked disgusting. And he had like these nubby toenails. So I'd like jump between tasks. But some of the bigger assets you might be on for a very long time. The Thunderbird was months, purely because of client changes. They'll be like, oh, we don't like that, we do like that. Or you'll be presenting kind of works in progress for the larger assets. For things that have to replicate stuff on set, usually is a much more kind of, the time frame is much more locked in because you know what it has to look like at the end of the day. It either gets approved or it doesn't. There's less creative control. Like if you're doing a digi-double of someone, like the boys' digi-double that I did, it had to look like him. That's all it had to hit. The turnaround really depends on how hero we call it, like how close to camera or how important that asset is. If it's a lamppost in the background of a scene, you might have to do it in half a day. If it's a lamppost that Peter Quill touches in Guardians of the Galaxy and it has to turn into a creature or whatever, we might have 3 weeks on it because to model and texture it because it needs to be seen that close up. So it really can depend on the asset. Even if an asset is boring doesn't mean it's unimportant. Half the time it does. But yeah, it doesn't, I know it doesn't really answer your question, but the timelines will bounce around a lot. So like a character, you could be working on it for a week, or you could have like 2 weeks to model it. It could vary, or it could even be longer, especially if like a lot of sculpting is needed. And then texturing, usually have less time because texturing is often a lot quicker to kind of iterate on if you go about it smartly. So you usually have less time. Maybe you get like, yeah, if it was 2 weeks a model, maybe you get half as much, like 5 days, working weekdays to texture it. But again, it depends if it's film or if it's TV. If it's TV, the budget is automatically smaller because they don't have as much money, so they have to make 10 times as many episodes for a quarter of the budget. But a film, you might have weeks on it. A TV show, you might have 2 days for the boys. Like literally, it was like go, go, go. So it doesn't really answer your question. And I know a lot of people say to me, they're like, oh, that seems like not enough time. But of course, when you're learning, like those things seem really scary. I remember being like, I'd have to make that in a week. I couldn't make that in a month. But you will learn and you will have support. When you're in an industry, you always have support. If you're a junior and you're hired, usually they'd give you a buddy or there's like internal documents, and you'd usually have at least a week of training beforehand on an asset because they want to see that you can do it before like getting you on the real thing and accidentally wasting time. So I know it can be worrying when people start talking about deadlines, especially if you're learning a skill, but you will get better, and that shouldn't be a worry to anybody.
Yeah, and one more is when you modeled A-Train, you didn't have to take into account animation, you just shipped it off, or did you like have to take into account like how they're going to animate it in the
so there's always, with characters, because the way we model characters, you might have seen it, but characters always stand like this, yeah. So we do A pose these days because it's slightly better to rig. So characters will always have the way we build it, so what we call the wireframe, which is, like I was saying earlier, if it's like if you imagine a chicken mesh underneath it, you kind of paper mache on top. That's sort of what modeling is. You're making the chicken mesh that sort of covers up. So that will make sure, like for example, an arm, you would make sure you had 3 loops there so that it deforms nicely. With faces, you make sure you don't have so sometimes you'll get 5-sided points, which you want to avoid in any place of articulation. So you always place them here, because if you put your finger on your cheek, if you go like that, this doesn't move, but this moves a lot. So you don't want those points stretching here, you want them stretching here. So you kind of have to consider topology in anything that moves, which is usually anything organic. With a lamppost, it doesn't really matter. You want it to be clean because you don't want there to be any render artifacts, or you don't want it to shade weird when lights hit it, which is an issue if your topology is incorrect. But yeah, with characters or creatures, that stuff is always taken into consideration, because I don't think I've ever worked on a creature or a character in a film that's been static, because you never have even if they're like frozen in time or whatever, you still have to pose them, which requires animation to do at least the bare minimum of posing it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
No worries.
Any more? Kibi is at hand. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. I'm standing right there and it's weird. Let's thank Michael for coming all the way to see us today.
Cheers.
Thank you. Okay, guys, you can go now. Yes, Kibi. There's another talk at 4 for some of you in Performance Space 2, someone from Frame Store. So yeah, might see you there. There might be space as well if anyone wants to join. But yeah, thanks, guys. Thank you.